Very glad you're with us for the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. There used to be quiet Fridays in Washington and in the news cycles. That just doesn't happen anymore. But we still got a lot to talk about. We'll be talking about another example of the government spending a ridiculous amount of money on electric vehicle policy and not getting much for it. The only person who might be impressed with what's happened at the Postal Service here is Pete Buttigieg, given his record on EVs. But we'll get to that in just a moment. We'll also take a look inside the Venezuelan boat story. Jim's written about it this week, and it keeps having twists and turns. And so we'll talk about what we know as of this point. And then in a moment, we'll talk about the arrest of the pipe bomber. Alleged pipe bomber from January 5th, 2021 at the RNC and DNC. There hadn't been an arrest on that until yesterday. So all of that in just a moment. But first, OneSkin. And if you're enjoying the winter weather here in the D.C. area today, make sure you take care of that skin. And if you need to, I highly recommend OneSkin. At the core is their patented OS1 peptide, the first ingredient proven to target senescent cells, the root cause of wrinkles, crepiness, and loss of elasticity, which are all key signs of skin aging. And these results have now been validated in 5 different clinical studies.
As Greg mentioned, it's snowing in the D.C. area today. It's cold. It's going to be bad for your skin. I'd also point out that Fairfax County Public Schools had a 2-hour delay, which my younger son was convinced was not nearly enough. Offered him a ride, didn't take it. But anyway, look, take care of your skin on cold days like this. Known for cult skincare favorites like OS1 Body, OS1 Face, and OS1 Eye, OneSkin stands out for their science-first approach to skin aging, which delivers hydration, barrier support, and powerful longevity benefits in every product. And remember, this is certified safe for sensitive skin, free from more than 1,500 harsh and irritating ingredients, and dermatologist tested.
Yeah, probably not going to need it today, but I really like the sunscreen from OneSkin. It does a great job not only of protecting and saving the skin from sunburn, but also just taking good care of the skin overall. And now OneSkin launching their limited edition holiday sets, including the Nightly Rewind gift set. So lots for you to choose from. For a limited time, try OneSkin for 15% off using the code 3ML at oneskin.co/3ML. And after you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them, so please support the 3 Martini Lunch and tell them that we sent you. That's code 3ML at oneskin.co/3ML. All right, Jim, there's been a lot of speculation over the past nearly 5 years about the pipe bomber. Pipe bombs found at the Republican National Committee, Democratic National Committee buildings right around the time of the January 6th riots and so forth. And so never had an arrest, never had a suspect named, but now we do. Now we do. Yesterday, the announcement was made by Pam Bondi and Jeanine Pirro and Kash Patel and everybody involved. A 30-year-old has been taken into custody. His name is Brian Cole Jr. He's from Woodbridge, Virginia, and it's the first time the Justice Department has ever named a suspect in the long-running investigation into this situation. There's a lot floating out there on social media about whether this guy's got radical affiliations, his writings. I don't think that any of that came up yesterday in the press conference. I'm guessing that evidence is going to trickle out as we get closer to trial, if in fact any of that's true. What Jeanine Pirro said yesterday is that, quote, this case involved millions of pieces of data. It's a huge win because it was like finding a needle in a haystack. They were pinging cell phones. They were tracking purchases for making the components of the pipe bombs, license plates, the vicinity of RNC and DNC, which are right by Capitol Hill, right around that time when there hadn't been a lot of traffic at that point. So, Jim, it looks like a pretty solid case based on what's been revealed so far. So what do you make of the fact that it almost took 5 years to get here, but we did get here?
No, exceptional police work. I read through the affidavit. And you're right. This basically was a matter of matching the pinging of his cell phone, where his car was in relation to the individual caught on videotape, placing the bombs, and the purchases, and being able to connect the purchase of all of these components over a considerably wide period of time at a variety of different stores to his credit card. They didn't say so, but I heard saw some people speculating about whether AI or some other new kind of supercomputing was able to take an enormous amount of these data of these purchases and start connecting them together to what was known to be in the components of the bombs. Exceptional police work. And I'm going to say, kudos to the FBI. No sarcasm, no diehard references. But just, I will also note one of the ironies of this It's in today's Morning Jolt. I went back and I checked. Dan Bongino is right now the deputy director of the FBI. He's the number 2 guy right there. Not even last year, February 4th of this year, Bongino was a podcast hoster before he became deputy director of the FBI. And if there's anything we've noticed, it's you can't trust somebody who hosts a podcast.
Never.
They're just the worst. Yeah. But semi-seriously, like he's interviewing Darren Beattie, who is right now working in the U.S. State Department. And Darren Beattie was utterly convinced that the bombs themselves were not genuine bombs, that they were a hoax, that they were fake, right? He talks about the video. He says that the plainclothes U.S. Capitol Police officer who noticed one and the Secret Service agent, he contends they were acting very calmly. And he concludes from that they knew this was not a genuine bomb. By the way, when I point out the genuine bomb, like Bongino was on Sean Hannity's program last night, and he says, I don't want to get into the motive. It would be very early for me to get out ahead of that on motive. Obviously, the motive was to drop a couple of bombs that could have killed people. Right? So, according to the statement from the deputy director, these are bombs, or at least the person created bombs with the intention to kill people. We don't know if he built them correctly or some component was missing or something, but in the eyes of the law, it doesn't really matter. You don't get any, reduction in sentence for being a crappy bomb builder, right? And so the entire account of this guy Beattie, of this being a vast conspiracy, and at one point during the conversation, he says to Bongino, this goes all the way up to the former vice president, Kamala Harris. That was all nonsense. And for 5 years, look, I understand it's nature abhors a vacuum. And when no one gets arrested, there is this very, strange sense of like, who was it? People start believing in government conspiracies. People start believing that there was some sinister effort to make the Trump fans on January 6th look bad. It goes into all kinds of different directions. Based on what's in the affidavit, based on what the FBI has said, all of that was nonsense. This is just yet another angry young man. In this case, unusually, one who looks like Steve Urkel. But otherwise, a person who, intended to do harm. Nothing in the affidavit points to co-conspirators. Nothing in the affidavit points to some larger organization or anything like that. This doesn't mean other people couldn't get indicted in the future, but at this point, all of the components are described as being built and assembled and put in place by the suspect who's been brought under arrest. So, this is genuinely kudos to Dan Bongino for abandoning the conspiracy belief theories, all that stuff, following the facts, according to the statements. There were no new tips. There was no new evidence. This was just simply looking back harder at the evidence that they had accumulated and what must have been a painstaking process and or aided by some sort of computer technology that, the FBI doesn't want to talk about too much, that something about that made them able to connect the dots, figure out who purchased all the components, leading them to the suspect. Good job, FBI, and maybe a lesson that, what? There's no cigarette smoking man. There's no vast, sinister conspiracy. Look, listeners of this program know we are very critical of Kamala Harris. We're willing to believe a whole lot about her, but no, we do not believe she was part of a vast conspiracy to plant those pipe bombs. So good work, FBI, and I think a hard lesson for the conspiracy theorists out there.
Yeah, well, there's still some concern and questions about if this evidence was already accumulated, why hadn't the FBI made an arrest or put it together sooner? Maybe we'll get an explanation on that. But
seemingly, obviously, this wasn't a priority or wasn't a sufficient high enough priority. And in a very strange way, Bongino or other figures in the FBI within the Trump administration who believed that there was a conspiracy may have driven them to keep digging into this, which led to this very mundane explanation of why it happened.
Exactly.
But either way, justice is done.
Yeah, a few weeks ago, there had been rumors that it was a woman who had done this. And then we find out it was this guy who's been arrested is like 5'6" or 5'7" and has described it as a petite man. I'm not sure that's how I would like to be described. I'm not 5'7", I'm 6 foot. But nonetheless, it's probably not how most guys would like to be described in a criminal description.
Well,
but that's probably why some people did think it was a woman.
Greg, if you'll indulge me to do a David Caruso, I just think that some journalistic institution is watching the reputation go up in a blaze. down.
Oh, man. All right. Well, much more to come, including the Venezuelan boats and a waste of a tremendous amount of money on electric vehicles. But first, let's talk about a perfect investment for your money, and that is with Noble Gold Investments. Fantastic option, 4 years running, the #1 gold IRA option, and it's easy to see why. As I've said before, I've spoken with Colin Plume and the great folks over there at Noble Gold Investments. Super calm, super knowledgeable. They lay everything out calmly. They don't rush you. They go through your options, and then once they know what you want to do and what your situation is, they put you in a position to make the best decision possible about your investments.
When it comes to your finances, there's never going to be a shortage of advice. There may be a shortage of good advice, and you're probably going to ask yourself, how do I know if this person knows what they're talking about? Is this person trying to sell me something? Well, what's great about the people at Noble Gold is they speak to you like a trusted friend, not a finance bro or some fast-talking used car salesman or something like that. They know the markets, they know the metals, and they know the strategies. So they're not interested in hype. They just want to offer honest, fact-based insights and to give you clear options.
So before you check out for the holidays, do one smart thing for your future. Go to noblegoldinvestments.com/3ML and download their free gold and silver guide. When you open a qualified account, you'll receive 10 1-ounce commemorative silver holiday coins. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com/3ML. That's noblegoldinvestments.com/3ML. All right, Jim, on to the Venezuelan boats. This story has a lot of different layers to it, but we'll try to sum it up as quickly as possible. The Washington Post first reported that on September 2nd, a kill everyone on board one of those Venezuelan drug boats was issued by Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, and the boat was struck. It was disabled, but a couple of guys survived. They were scrambling back onto the boat, trying to stay alive, and then Hegseth, basically in some sort of Hans Gruber fashion, said, "Hit it again." And then someone said, "No, let him pull back. Thank you. I'll take it under advisement. Hit it again." Well, that narrative has been challenged. First of all, in the New York Times, where it says, a number of officials they interviewed said each official said Mr. Hegseth's directive did not specifically address what should happen if a first missile turned out not to fully accomplish all of the things that he wanted to accomplish. And the official said his order was not a response to surveillance footage showing that at least 2 people on the boat survived the first blast. Admiral Mitch Bradley, who's the head of U.S. Special Operations Command, ordered the initial missile strike and then several follow-up strikes that killed the initial survivors and sank the disabled boat. As that operation unfolded, they said Mr. Hegseth did not give any further orders to him. That seems to be, for the most part, backed up by this report from Martha Raddatz over at ABC News.
And tonight, new information. According to a source familiar with the incident, the 2 survivors climbed back onto the boat after the initial strike. They were believed to be potentially in communication with others and salvaging some of the drugs. Because of that, it was determined they were still in the fight and valid targets. A JAG officer was also giving legal advice.
And so, Jim, in the Morning Jolt a couple of days ago, you kind of went through the evolution of the administration's explanation of what happened here, and it certainly has evolved to a certain extent over time. Yesterday, Mitch Bradley was up on classified hearings on Capitol Hill, and the lawmakers coming out of those hearings, for the most part, the left saying it's one of the worst things they've ever seen. Most people on the right saying everything looks fine to me. And then Don Bacon, who's a Republican but not a fan of this administration, says after seeing it, he feels better than he did before, but he thinks the rules of combat need to be clarified a little bit better. So where do we stand here?
Yeah, I think if you I'm coming down close to the Don Bacon area, and not just because of his name. I kind of have this look. I'm open to the argument that whether these could be, usual traditional Navy or Coast Guard interdiction raids. That we don't necessarily need to be bombing these guys from the skies. But also at the same time, I don't think there's any dispute these are bad guys, and who, the interdiction of drugs is absolutely a mission. And I think when I was like, okay, seeing this controversy bubble up, what has been said? And I went through it, and from the very first announcements from the president in the Oval Office back on September 2nd, a lot of statements from Marco Rubio, a lot of statements from the Secretary of Defense, and then from the White House press secretary as well. And I think the part of the problem here is that the administration has not told, when you begin and say, here's everything we know, and you lay it all out clearly, everybody knows what the facts are, you end up in a much better situation than when the information comes out in dribs and drabs from different administration officials. Like Rubio on one of his first statements was these particular drugs were probably headed to Trinidad or some other country in the Caribbean, at which point they just contribute to the instability these countries are facing. It's a very factual, true statement. The problem is the very next day he says that these boats pose an immediate threat to the United States, period, his words. Well, if they're going to Trinidad or Tobago, like in one statement you're saying this is a threat to these other countries in the region that we don't want to see destabilized, and the next thing you're saying an immediate threat. Now the question, immediate? I mean, they're down there. It's 1,500 miles from Florida. That's not if you just come out, this kind of came out in the discussion of the arrest of the pipe bomber yesterday. If you and I are old enough to remember Norman Schwarzkopf and the Persian Gulf War briefings, right? The administration is capable of doing this. I thought the military briefing after the strike on the Iranian nuclear sites was very detailed, offered as much detail as they possibly could. It did not get out over its skis. It just was very clear. Here's what we know. Here's our understanding of how the operation was. Here's why we know what we know. And they just gave the best, clearest explanation they could. The administration really has not done that. And much to my frustration, they got rid of the entire existing Pentagon press corps, or basically drove them out by requesting them to sign disclosure forms, limiting access, brought in a whole bunch of folks who are, let's face it, much more pro-Trump. And I don't think they've done it. I think just a couple of days ago, they did their first on-camera briefing in like 2-3 months. Now, ideally, every time they strike one of these boats, they'd say, this is what we did. This is where the location was. To the extent possible, say this is how we know what they were transporting. I've seen a lot of people saying these boats are transporting fentanyl. Really, almost no fentanyl comes from Venezuela. These boats are almost certainly trafficking cocaine. That's bad. Cocaine kills Americans too. I'm not saying, but be clear and specific and accurate in what you're saying about these things. I know you can't disclose sources and methods, but give us some sense of how you know these boats are associated with Tren de Aragua, currently in the Agua. Or any of these other, like tell us, here's how we selected this as a viable target. Talk about this as part of a pattern of where these boats go and stuff. Here's why we determined this. To the extent possible, maybe bring out the JAG officer and say, this is how we determined that this was a legitimate target. And if you do something like a second strike, which again, we didn't hear about for the first 10, 11 days after this incident of these public statements, say, yes, we struck. But by the way, 4 missiles on one boat. That's, I'm not exactly thrilled by the cost effectiveness of this policy, but fine. This is why we just struck it a second time. If you lay it out, I think the American people are going to be fairly sympathetic to this. But when it comes out in this, and what one cabinet official said one day is contradicting what the other cabinet official said the other day, that creates confusion. That creates suspicion that you're not getting the whole story. That creates a suspicion that there's something sinister being hidden here. Again, I think if there's a lot of secrecy around this that doesn't seem necessary and that is eventually causing these problems. And again, when you show people this is why we made the decision we did, even somebody like Don Bacon is willing to say, okay, I see where you're coming from. I see why you did this. I feel better about this.
Yeah. Now, 2 things can be true at the same time. The administration should have its story straight, and it should be straight from the beginning. And at the same time, you've got Democrats out there like Jim Himes saying, these were sailors just trying to survive.
Yeah.
And most Americans are going to be like, no. These are drug traffickers trying to poison our people and make a ton of money off of it. And if they end up getting double tapped out there in the Caribbean, we don't care.
Yeah. And by the way, coverage from reporters on the ground in places like Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago have said a lot of fishermen in recent years have turned to drug smuggling either as a mid-career switch or something they do on the side to make some extra money, or they do them as opportunities arise. So it's possible these guys were fishermen. It's possible these guys were also drug smugglers. And that the important thing is what they were doing at the time of the strike, which, based on what we know, appears to be smuggling drugs.
Yeah, exactly. Americans aren't going to have sympathy for that either. It's not to drop in another Die Hard line, but the end of Die Hard with a Vengeance, and there's a problem with a helicopter, which is a consistent problem in Die Hard. John McClane says, you think I should call a fire truck? And Samuel L. Jackson says, nah, let them cook.
Let them cook. By the way, listeners are probably wondering, is it 25 days till Christmas? And are Jim and Greg going to try to put a Die Hard reference in every episode? Have to wait and see. But
if it
the answer is yes.
If it fits. All right, let's talk about your health. Probably doing much better than those drug traffickers. And, your liver is a big part of your health because it does more than 500 functions every single day, from filtering unwanted elements to supporting digestion, helping with energy. but we don't think very often about it until something's wrong. But what if we actually supported our liver before any problems got started? Prevention is the best cure, right? Well, Dose is clinically backed liquid liver health supplement. Daily 2-ounce shot. Could not be easier. Tastes like fresh squeezed orange juice. It's not one of these things where you're like, ugh, this taste is going to be disgusting. I just got to force it down. No. You're going to want to take it. And it then cleanses the liver of unwanted stressors that's slowing it down.
I should point out, Greg, when you say liquid liver health supplement, we should emphasize that what you're consuming is a liquid, not that it will liquefy your liver. Your liver is pretty solid. It's got fluids inside it, but it's going to work pretty well. No, seriously, your liver is really important to your health. It processes everything you consume and performs more than 500 daily functions. We're talking about energy production, digestion, fat metabolism, vitamin storage. And when it's overworked, you're going to feel it. But when you start drinking Dose daily, you're going to reduce that sluggishness. You're going to get rid of those midday crashes. You're going to support your metabolism, and it can even aid your daily digestion.
So if you are ready to give your liver the support it deserves, head to dosedaily.co/3ml or enter 3ml to get 35% off the first month of your subscription. Your body does so much for you. Let's do something for it. That's dosedaily.co/3ml for 35% off your first month's subscription. All right, Jim, let's talk about more wasting of money. It's very common in government, as we talked about yesterday, Obamacare subsidies and fraud and all that. But it wasn't that long ago we were talking about then Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, and the Department of Transportation spent several $1 billion in, what'd they get, like 6, 7, maybe 8 EV chargers out of it. Not a great return on investment. Well, apparently that's not the only situation where that's happening. This is the New York Post. The U.S. Postal Service's promised all-electric fleet is still woefully behind schedule, with more than $3 billion in taxpayer funding out the door and just 612 of the expected 35,000 battery-powered delivery trucks built, according to a letter sent to Iowa Senator Joni Ernst. Former President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act set aside $3 billion for what Ernst has since ripped as a green boondoggle that saw almost all of that amount paid to Wisconsin-based defense contractor Oshkosh to build the environmentally friendly mail trucks. Now, Jim, that's $5 million per truck that they actually spit out, but 612 out of an expected 35,000. Buttigieg is probably impressed with that, given the expectations with the EV chargers. But once again, our tax dollars are just getting flushed down the drain.
Greg, for $5 million, I want the Batmobile. I like $5 million? Is this thing... It's environmentally friendly, but the whole thing is plated in gold. Like how do you run up that much per unit? No, it's just exasperating. And I also noticed by this is being created by Wisconsin-based defense contractor Oshkosh. Do these mail trucks need to go to like Syria or something, or Afghanistan, Iraq? Gonna deploy them when we occupy Venezuela? Like what? Just how difficult? And then deeper in the article, it says that, well, part of the problem is that you need, what they need is that the right-hand driver's vehicle, like over in Europe, instead of left-hand driver's Europe. Because I assume they're driving. You only have one guy driving the truck, and he's got the mail, and he's driving along the road, and the mailbox is on the side of the road, so he doesn't have to get out of the truck, and he can just put it into the mailbox. So now the question is, why do we have, if that's really that important, why do we have so many left-hand mail trucks driving around out there? It's, an absolute boondoggle. Congratulations and thank you, Joni Ernst, for trying to get rid of this. Not going to get her any fans in Wisconsin, but I'm sorry, Oshkosh. At a rate like this, at a pace like this, it is just utterly unjustifiable. And Ezra Klein, who famously discovered government inefficiency in late 2024 in his book Abundant. By the way, nobody had ever noticed that the government is an inefficient thing. And I'm saying this with great sarcasm. Made points at that. I think he used the example of the electric vehicle chargers, and he talked about all the different hoops they had to go through and all that stuff. If you are a Democrat and you believe in the government's ability to solve problems, and you believe government can be a good tool, particularly the federal government can be a good tool in helping the American people, you need to confront this. You can't sweep it under the rug. You can't hand wave it away. You can't say, oh, those unreasonable Republicans, they hate government, blah, blah, blah. This is why people don't have faith in government. And I'm very skeptical of government. I've been there, our whole career. Listeners know, the tone we take on these sorts of things. But if you could show me a government program that worked well, then I'd be forced to rethink how I approach these things. I'd be forced to say, oh, okay, maybe stuff like this suggests to me the Green New Deal, Build Back Better, all of this stuff were just a giant pile of money, and the whole thing was watched over about as effectively as Tim Walz watched over funds of the state government in Minnesota. When you have that much money at stake, it brings out the crooks, it brings out the grifters, it brings out the people who will promise the federal government, oh, sure, we'll make that deadline. Oh, sure. And they will do whatever they can to get their hands on that money. And then years later, you end up with some mess like this.
Yeah, it's absolutely unacceptable. And it reminds me of Milton Friedman way back in the day saying that you will never be as careful with other people's money as you will with your own.
Yes.
When it's your money, you'll be very frugal, very scrutinizing. When you've got a giant $3 billion pile of other people's money, we'll figure it out. And then you actually don't. And that's if you're honest about it. That's if you're honest about it. When you got the people with their hands out, the crooks in the process, then it gets even worse.
I want to say it's my National Review colleague, James Lilacs, but I could be wrong. But somebody said there are 4 ways you can spend money, right? When you're spending money on yourself, you're looking for the best value, right? Price matters and quality matters. Now, if you're spending your money on somebody else, you completely not care about quality. You're shopping for Christmas presents, but you're also really careful about cost. You really want to make sure you get something. You're not going to throw away money, at least unless you're super wealthy and you can afford to lose it. If you're buying somebody else's money on yourself, well, then quality matters. You want the very best stuff, and price doesn't matter. Somebody else is paying for it. And then there's the odd situation, which most private citizens don't really experience very much, where you're spending somebody else's money on something for somebody else. And in that scenario, you don't really care that much about price or quality. And that's like 99% of all government spending is people spending other people's money on stuff for other people.
That's exactly right. That breaks it down so perfectly. So, yeah, take care of your spending appropriately this holiday season. Don't expect the government to do it. They got a long track record in a lot of different areas of not doing that with your money. So anyway, Jim, sorry to end on such a downer, but we are at the end of the week. Enjoy the trace of snow that we got today, and I'll see you on Monday.
Things will pick up. A trace of snow. It's delayed opening worthy.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Maybe
see you tomorrow, Greg.
I'm
sorry, see you Monday.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast if you don't already, and tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. And follow 3 Martini Lunch on Facebook and Instagram. Have a great weekend. Join us Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.